Well, 2022 has been kind of the comeback year for a lot of bands that we haven't really heard a whole lot of lately. I mean, Porcupine Tree put out a pretty okay album. Yeah, I guess it was only a matter of time for Mars Volta to come back, and well, here we are. So, with a band with such a huge legacy and so much time between their last album and this one, it'll be interesting to see how it holds up. So, yeah, let's dive in. The Mars Volta self-titled album. Yeah, this one's an interesting one. So for those of you not in the know, the Mars Volta is a pretty seminal progressive rock band from like the early 2000s, getting their start in 2001 from El Paso, Texas, blending a lot of Mexican and Latino and Latinx sound into a hard rock expression. And what really set them apart from a lot of the kind of more proggy rock bands at the time was their relentless, chaotic energy. Like they were go, 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 go to the point where it was like trying to hold on to I don't know, like a runaway car. Omar Rodriguez Lopez, the main guitarist, producer, and composer of a lot of their music, kind of blended with Cedric Blixer Zavala, I think is how you pronounce his last name, with his vocal works and his poetry. Those two marriage together created what was the crux and what was the identity of the Mars Volta. And yeah, I mean, they put out, as I mentioned, a number of really great albums. Their debut, Deloused in the Crematorium, was huge. Going into Francis the Mute, which I still think is their best work. And then Amputexture, I think, really capped off their first three banging albums. Like those are just like pantheon level of brillianceness. Bedlam and Goliath, wasn't a big fan of that one, but I loved Octahedron, and I know I'm in the minority when it comes to Octahedron, and for me it's one of their best works. I freaking love that one. And Nocturnicate was fine. You know, I think they kind of went out with a whimper rather than a bang at that point, but you know, we're 10 years out from Nocturnicate, if you can believe it. You know, it was released in 2012, and here we are at 2020 with their comeback album, The Mars Volta. And in some ways, we weren't necessarily surprised that this one came out because Omar and Cedric had already reunited once with at the Drive-In. So it doesn't surprise me that they came back to do another Mars Volta album. And I feel like this one, getting into this album here, I feel this one it kind of picked up exactly where Nocturnicate left off, but advances their story, advances their narrative, and advances their creative outpour. You know, like this is 10 years, and you can feel that both Omar and Cedric have evolved. They've matured. They're practically different people. I mean, who isn't after the past 2 years? But they've definitely matured their sound. And in one respect, they've also calmed down. And I mean, they've calmed down pretty much since Bedlam. But that calming down is definitely found on here. There's a lot more emphasis on the songwriting ship as a craft in terms of more somber, poppier, bite-sized chunks. And I could see a lot of people being turned off by that. And honestly, on its face, so would I. Like, part of the reason why I love Mars Volta was that crunch, was that relentless, aggressive, chaotic approach to their music. And hearing them in more of a mellow, softer, poppy expression, I'd be like, well, that's not really why I come to Mars Volta. But part of this is also to say, like, they're a completely different band, and that's part of the reason why they decided to go for the self-titled route. I can see a lot of people being turned off immediately, especially their fans. Like, die-hard Mars Volta fans will probably not connect with this one all that much, and honestly, I don't think that's what Mars Volta tried to do with this album. I think this album is much more trying to develop a new fan base. I think this is them trying to start from scratch. And you can hear that because a lot of the big ideas that they had originated from their first three albums are kind of gone. But I will say the essence, the pure distilled essence of Mars Volta is still found on here. You know, you still have Cedric's lyrics, his poetry is a lot more distilled. There's not a whole lot of, beating around the bush, a lot less metaphors and similes and allegories within his lyrics. A lot more is to the punch. It's a lot more direct, and I can really, really appreciate that because there's a lot less left to interpretation, but there's a lot better storytelling that's being found within it. And also found within it is Omar's brilliant guitar work, but I think what shines a lot more is his production work and his orchestration of sound. Even though his guitars aren't necessarily front and center the entire time, or even front and center most of the time, what is found is a lot more of blending and trying new things. There's a lot more experimentation of sound. A lot of the sound that is found on here is being led by synthesizers, by production, and it really is taking an idea and making music from it. And I really, really appreciate Omar allowing himself to develop and allowing himself to grow as a musician in this sense. And I think that for me, this is probably, this is a lot better than Bedlam and Nocturnicate in my sense. I think that this is a really good outfit and a really good work of art. I'm finding myself really moved by a lot of the more somber, a lot more of the heartfelt, and a lot more of the intimate pieces that are found on this album. Like, for example, the 5th track of Virgil, the 7th track of Cerulia, and the 9th track of Palm Full of Crux. These 3 tracks really do paint the Mars Volta in a whole new box, in a whole new direction. Virgil and Cerulia are my 2 favorite tracks off of this album, and they just drip with glory and beauty. Like, I find myself with a good pair of headphones and letting these really catchy and really immediate sounds really wash over me. This isn't something that I would have thought that the Mars Volta was able to do when I was saying, oh yeah, the music was immediate, the music was beautiful, the music was catchy. Those were definitely nomenclatures that I wouldn't ascribe to a Mars Volta, but I'm definitely loving the presentation on here. And I'm still loving a lot of the experimentations that are found on here. The 12th track of Ekis 3 has some really brilliant production works on this bass sound that they're using within the synthesizers, and it really goes to show the production side and the production value that's found on here. Again, listening to this on a good pair of headphones, you can hear all the different layers and all the different styles that I really do gravitate to the Mars Volta. Shore Story, Graveyard Love, No More Gains, they all have these really astute and powerful drum styles that really do blow me away with how complex and how dynamic their drumming can be in a little bit more of a subdued setting. So even though this track has 14 tracks, this album is still relatively short at about 44 minutes. I like how each track kind of blends into the next, providing, about 44 minutes of a continuous listen. At no point do I ever feel like, ooh, that song stuck around way too shortly. I wish I had a little bit more, because each section blends right into the next track. And I really enjoy this presentation. And, most of the time I always say, the tracks are too short. I really wish that they could spread their wings and fly for a little bit longer. But really, because each passage is its own little chapter in this bigger narrative, it never feels too short-lived. It never feels too short. So I really appreciate that. And I feel like if they had stayed a little bit longer in this, I probably would have been getting a little bit bored, and they probably would have been a little bit more repetitive. But across, 45 minutes worth of music, they stay for just the right amount of time for a very, very enjoyable listen. So in the end, I thoroughly enjoyed the Mars Volta, their self-titled work, and I can see a lot of people not liking it. I asked Twitter a while back what people thought about this album over the weekend, and the overwhelming census that I got was that people aren't connecting with this. People aren't getting this. And honestly, I can understand that. I totally see why the fan base that grew up loving the Mars Volta aren't as excited about this album. But for me, there was something on here that I found brilliant and beautiful, and I thoroughly, thoroughly loved it. So you kind of have to approach this album by putting your expectations at the door and realizing this isn't those big blow down the doors that in the Crematorium, that Francis the Mute, or even that Amputexture came to the forefront for. This is the continuation of Octahedron and Tourniquet but in a much more accessible and intimate style, as well as a lot more mature. So yeah, it's for that reason that I'll say the Mars Volta self-titled album is one that I would absolutely pick up in physical format. You know, I think this album is a win. I think this album is a triumph. I highly recommend it. But again, you kind of have to leave your expectations at the door, because I can see a lot of people not connecting to this or liking it as much as I do. But yeah, I would say that this is probably their fourth best album after Ambitexture. You know, like kind of which one I like more at the moment is going back and forth. But yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed this one. I really, really did. So yeah, that's what I've got. I fully admit and recognize that I'm most likely in the minority with this one, but that's where I'm at. That's where I'm at. What did you guys think about this album? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Please let me know of your own thoughts by commenting down below. And yeah, that's all I've got for you guys today. So thank you all so much for watching. As always, you guys are definitely the best. And until next time, notes out.